This Friday episode of the Basu and Godin Notebook is brought to you by Thursday. Thursday for your every need when Friday keeps too busy. So, hello everybody. I am Marc-Antoine Godin with Arpin Basu, and Arpin, I'm sorry we had to stay up late tonight and record that episode on Thursday night because I'm on Formula One duty this weekend. So
yes, I'm not gonna lie. I don't miss covering that event. I covered it every year for 10 years, and I can't remember ever once enjoying covering the event. I can understand that a lot of people enjoy watching the event. It's not a very fun event to cover necessarily, in the sense that access is extremely difficult. You're hustling around. It's usually blazing hot. I don't think the forecast this weekend calls for much heat.
No,
but,
it's very pleasant. Pleasant.
But it's usually scorching hot. And but anyhow, enjoy that this weekend.
Thank you.
I'll be enjoying not covering it. You can enjoy covering it.
Fine. All right. Well, I cover what I'm being told. So that's what it is.
You gotta go where they send you. But that's it. I'm glad. I don't have to do that. I will watch on my television.
I'll be back on hockey duty shortly after, though, and let's dive right into it because it's been award season in the NHL with all sorts of funny, not funny, quirky, not mech, quirky releases of award winners. But there's news in the Montreal Canadiens land. With Lane Hutson being Calder winner, being also placing very well in the Norris Trophy rankings.
Yeah.
Plus a few good spots for Nick Suzuki. So there's that. We had people also on our Monday episode for our paid subscribers. We decided to delay some of the mailbag questions to our later episode. So we're going to touch on that today. And there's also, wanted to have your take on Jason Robertson at some point during the show, because he's been in the news. We've been talking so much about how the Canadiens could go or should go after or need to go after a second line center. What if there is an option there at wing instead of center for them? So we'll discuss that. But listen, I'll tee it off for you first. Not a surprise for you, I guess, that Lane won the Calder this week.
No, shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. I was somewhat surprised how convincingly he won it. You know, he got, I think, 165, if I'm not mistaken, of the 191 first place votes. I assumed there would be much more support for primarily Macklin Celebrini. I mean, I'm surprised Macklin Celebrini finished third. I think that's how my ballot looked. I had Lane Hutson, Dustin Wolf, Macklin Celebrini as my top three. But I thought more people would have voted for Macklin Celebrini, and just because as a centerman on a very young team that wasn't all that competitive. Like, I mean, there was an argument to be made. He had a kind of a difficult task going up against top centers every night, all that stuff. I mean, a lot of the things that Lane Hutson did, but I felt that Hutson's role on a team that reached the playoffs, particularly, but a team that was in contention for a playoff spot, accentuated his candidacy. I thought what Dustin Wolf did is so rare to see a rookie goaltender come in and perform like he did. And I always lean goalie, defenseman, then forward in the Calder voting, which is, I think I mentioned on the show, but last year I had Brock Faber first on my ballot ahead of Connor Bedard because of what he did on a competitive team. Very similar to Lane Hutson with the minutes that he played and everything. You know, not a similar player necessarily, but a similar role on the Wild. So yeah, I thought, you know, it was somewhat surprising to see just how resounding a win it was. Not that it wasn't deserved. Obviously, I put him first on my ballot, so I thought it was deserved. But I was surprised to see how many people around the league um, endorsed his rookie season as heavily as it was.
Yeah, well, I think that the fact that he saw, and we'll touch on that in a few minutes, the fact that he ended up on so many ballots in the Norris Trophy vote shows how, and it was mainly out of town votes. There were very few like Montreal voters who voted for him in that category. But I think that there's an appreciation for his rookie season and the immediate impact that he had in the NHL at defense position. But at the same time, I mean, talking to people around the league in the last month or so, I feel as though a lot of people just waited to see how things would play out between the Canadiens and the Calgary Flames, and how, you know, both Hutson and Dustin Wolf would fare in the destiny or the outcome of those seasons, respectively. And the fact that the Canadiens ended up going to the postseason with Hutson, you know, finishing really strong, and on the other side, you know, Wolf, not that he tailed off, but I mean, the whole team at some point just ran out of steam a little bit. And probably that it was a deciding factor for a lot of people, that it's just a matter of, you know, who made the biggest difference at the finish line. And, you know, you compare that to Celebrini. I understand that he had a tremendous season. There's no doubt about that. But the pressure that was put both on Hutson and Wolf, and the influence they had on a somewhat competitive team in both cases, it was greater than a guy who was, yes, playing heavy minutes and putting up a lot of points, and he has all my respect. And I thought halfway in the season that he would win it. But there's the fact of the matter is, the season in San Jose was completely inconsequential. So the level of pressure was probably less than for Hutson and Wolf.
Yeah, and it's funny, if there were voters who were waiting to see whether Calgary would get in or Montreal would get in, you know, Calgary finished with more points than Montreal. You know, they didn't get in on a tiebreak. You know, so it was like, you know, it does bother me somewhat when the playoffs get so heavily weighted, especially in, you know, Hart Trophy. You can kind of justify it because it's most valuable to your team, and even though it doesn't say anywhere your team has to be a playoff team, you know, I mean, but it's kind of understood that it'd be a little odd to give the Hart Trophy to someone who didn't make the playoffs. But, you know, a lot of people put a lot of weight on the Norris Trophy voting on that. You're mentioning the Calder Trophy voting on that. Like, it just doesn't, you know, is Zach Werenski did he have any less of a season because the Columbus Blue Jackets didn't make the playoffs? Like, I don't think so. I don't think that should influence how you vote for Werenski in the Norris Trophy. And so anyhow, I just find that, you know, if Wolf lost votes because the Flames didn't make it when they actually had a statistically better season than the Canadiens, they literally finished higher in the overall standings than Montreal. That would be unfortunate. You know, that would be a shame for him that if voters looked at it that way, which I'm sure some did for sure. Hutson getting, you know, 22 fifth place votes, finishing ninth in Norris voting, I think adds to the notion out there that a lot of people weigh the scoring leaders more heavily than others in Norris Trophy voting, and because right above him in Norris voting is Jacob Slavin in eighth, which is proof that thankfully a lot of people don't look at the scoring leaders necessarily, or don't only look at the scoring leaders when coming up with their Norris ballots. But still, I mean, just a great thing for Lane Hutson. The fact that he was able to keep it to himself for a week and a half since that video was shot in his hometown, and more importantly, that his dad was able to keep it to himself. Who you know, good on them for not spoiling the surprise, I guess. But just a tremendous season, and just, you know, a total validation of what this guy means to the Canadiens moving forward. You know, it's like, it's just, this is rare. First of all, no one's won the Calder since Ken Dryden in 1972. I thought the video the Canadians put out on that
Oh,
was pretty good.
yeah.
Um, so that's one thing. But now you have a guy who could conceivably, well, based on this voting result, should conceivably enter into the Norris conversation eventually, like legitimately, um, in future years. And every year awards season hasn't really, other than Carey Price, there's never been like when's the last like Canadian skater that was a real factor in award season? Thomas Plekanec and Philip Danault started to like gain momentum after a long time in Selke voting, but never quite got to the finalist stage. Um, Canadians haven't had PK Subban would have been the last, I guess, when he won the Norris, obviously. But it's a pretty rare thing that we're talking about a Canadian winning a trophy as a position player.
Yeah.
But also, we should be having this conversation. We could be having this conversation again, I should say, next year, because Ivan Demidov is going to enter next season as a Calder favorite. There's no doubt about that. So
Yeah.
that'd be pretty remarkable to not win the trophy in 53 years and then have it in back-to-back years.
Back to back.
Would
My
be
God,
pretty
imagine
crazy,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. I just want to correct myself quickly because I said that that Wolf and the Flames tailed off at the end. That's not true because Wolf had a bit of a dip in performances at the end of March, but he did finish on a strong note in April.
Yeah,
And
they
actually,
got 90 points. I mean, they had a great
they
season.
finished. They had points in their last 8 games, so that's not tailing off one bit.
Yeah. But
So he just had a letdown in the second half of March. Maybe a span of 6 or 7 games, which I mean, what can happen. I mean, it was a big load and a lot of pressure on him. But he had a tremendous season. Let's face it. And it's not. So when you say that, yeah, you were surprised that it was so drastic, the number one votes for Hutson. I share your sentiment. That's what I tweeted, right the moment that it was announced. But ultimately, Hutson was a unanimous top 2 pick. So he was either first or second on everybody's ballot.
I mean, he had a historic season. I mean, it's hard to ignore the historic nature of his season when there's only 3 defensemen in NHL history to have a more productive rookie season than Lane Hutson's. It's hard to put him too far down your rookie of the year ballot. Really unprecedented stuff. And then obviously on Thursday, you had him named to the all rookie team, which obviously is not really news after you win the Calder Trophy. But yeah, it was interesting talking to Lane, talking to us from the Bauer Combine in Boston. So obviously in a rink. And I don't think, he kind of outlined how his off season's gone. And he was like, yeah, I took a bit of time off and then I was back on the ice making sure I've still got it was what he said. It's like,
as if there's any doubt.
Well, it's as if there's any doubt, as if there's any need to make sure you've still got it in May, it's so, it's the one thing that stands out constantly about this guy is his singular focus on wanting to be the best. And, this, if anyone's worried that this is going to like get to his head or this is going to impact his ability to be effective, that's just not in this guy's makeup. And I think it was very, very appropriate that he was talking to us from the bowels of some rink in Boston with a whole bunch of sticks next to him and like this blank cinder block wall behind him. Like it was just like, it was perfect. It was just a perfect, if you were to come up, if you told like a set designer, like come up with a set for Lane Hutson to do his post Calder Trophy media, that's what you would make. And he didn't even do it on purpose. He's just in a rink because he's always in a rink.
It could be like his wallpaper or his back screen on a Zoom call, always just.
Well, that's it. Like it would have been appropriate had he done that, except he was actually in a room
Yeah.
that had those sticks and that wall. So
So winning this Calder trophy has not changed anything in the amount of bonuses that he could get because he had already maxed out everything that was available in his contract. And so it's funny how you got those A bonuses and B bonuses. The A bonuses were so easy, quote unquote, to reach for him this season because he needed 25 assists. Easy, 40 points, easy. Top 4 in ice time among the team's defensemen. No problem there.
Yeah.
0.49 point per game. You check that one too. He added today's selection on the all-rookie team. So those are all A bonuses. And the B bonus, there's top 10 in NHL defenseman goal, assists, points, ice time, or points per game. You need one of them. He's got at least one of them.
All but goals. Well, I think he's top 10 in all of those categories except for goals. I would think without looking it up, I would think I could pretty safely say that.
Yeah. So that's to be you got to watch that because next year there might be again another situation where he gets all his bonuses. So there would be another season of bonus overage on the Montreal Canadiens payroll. Although with that salary cap bump, it's unlikely to be much of an issue for them.
Yeah, well, you add Demidov's bonuses. They're losing Slafkovsky and Goulet potentially hitting bonuses. Goulet didn't hit that many of his, but Slafkovsky was actually very close to hitting. I forget right now, but he was very close to hitting a couple of extra bonuses that would have led to a bigger cap overage charge. But anyhow, next year they will have Hutson and Demidov, both of whom are very likely to max out their bonuses. So they will probably have to carry a cap overage. I don't think they're going to complain about it. I think they'll be fine with it. It's just that's how it is. Although you know what? I shouldn't say that because it's possible that because you only get the cap overage, you only get the bonus overage if those bonuses force you to exceed the salary cap.
Right.
Which they will next year because they'll be operating in LTIR unless they're able to trade Carey Price's contract. But in the last year of Demidov's contract, I guess they would not have that. They probably wouldn't have that issue because Price's contract would be off the books. So
yeah, that's true. So Hutson finished 9th in the Norris voting. Our friend in Sweden, Per Bjurman from Aftonbladet, gave him a 3rd place vote. He received also 5 4th place votes and 22 5th place votes. Which is, commendable. He was not on my ballot. There were so many good defensemen this year. My first votes were the same as the actual result. I had Makar, Werenski, Hughes, and Morrissey. But then as a number 5, I had Thomas Harley. And in the final voting, Victor Hedman and Rasmus Dahlin finished ahead of him. But all those guys, are very worthy candidates for the Norris, or at least for a nomination. But to see Hutson finishing 9th, man, that's that bodes well for his candidacy in the future.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. It does, and and the point total, it jumps out as a rookie, and especially on a team that didn't score all that many goals. And he could be for sure. And he wasn't just like a power play merchant. Like he had as many even strength points this season as Adam Fox and Victor Hedman and Josh Morrissey. He had 40 even strength points this season. So it's, I think a lot of us, we see like all the kind of the discourse and the banter online, on social media and stuff, and you see like fans of other teams kind of ripping guys, whether it's Hutson or whoever. But Hutson, he was the subject of a lot of that stuff, a lot of like Senators fans, Leafs fans, like, Flyers fans, because they're Mitchkov guys, like there was a lot of like criticism being thrown Hudson's way, and you see enough of it go by, you start to think like, okay, this is what the rest of the league thinks of him, and it could be in terms of the fans, but it's clear that in this case, the media and our fellow members of the PHWA did not buy into that stuff, and pretty strong endorsement from not just the Montreal chapter of the PHWA, but he got support league wide, obviously for the Calder, but those Norris votes, I don't think that many of them came from. I didn't have them on my ballot. I don't know how many of our colleagues had them on theirs, but didn't seem like a Montreal centric thing.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. I think he was on PK Subban's ballot. It's weird to see PK's name.
I know,
as a voting member when I remember voting for him.
Voting for him, yeah, exactly. PK did have him as a fifth place vote. Yeah, he gave him a fifth place vote. So did Pat Lalime. So that's a Quebec. That's a Quebec element.
But a few guys from TVA, if I'm not mistaken.
Felix Seguin as well. Yeah, from TVA. Yeah.
So okay, but I think that the more interesting development is seeing how Nick Suzuki has made some inroads in the league-wide perception of what he's becoming as a player, especially in I don't know. Well, I think that both the fact that he was not invited to the Four Nations and also the fact that, yes, he led the Canadiens to the playoffs, but those ballots had to be sent before the beginning of the playoffs. So it was really a testament of.
Well, you knew they had made the playoffs when you submitted your ballot. Yes. Right.
But I mean, it's not. Yeah. So you knew that, as the captain of the Montreal Canadiens, he had led his team to this playoff. So that's, yes, you had that information, but still, I think that he really opened a lot of eyes this season. Of course, there's the fact that it's his best season so far in his young career. Still a young career, because I think that even though he's in his mid-20s, he's one of those guys who's still progressing. He's we always expect that there's going to be a plateau, but since last year, where some players already start to plateau at that age, he reached another level, and significantly this season again. So it's encouraging if he keeps getting better like that. But I mean, man, he had his total votes for the Hart Trophy. It's just astounding. I mean,
dude, he finished tied with Connor McDavid. He had 26 voting points. He got a first place vote. So now, as we're recording this, the PHWA has not released the voting for the Hart Trophy. There's someone out there who thought that Nick Suzuki was the most valuable player in the National Hockey League this year. I would have to agree to disagree on that one. He got a second place vote, and he got 9 fifth place votes to finish tied with Connor McDavid, but one more first place vote than Connor McDavid, who got none, 0. Which
that's bizarre. I mean, I understand it was tough. I mean, listen. Connor McDavid is the best player in the league, and if you're going to give the Hart Trophy to the best player in the league, might as well give him the Hart Trophy every year. So it's who had the best season and who's the most valuable to his team. There's part of that definition, and I think that he's always going to be at a disadvantage because he's a teammate with Leon Draisaitl, and the one who gets the best regular season between the two ends up being on the ballot, but sometimes at the expense of the other. But then again, so that no one thought enough to give him a first place vote, that's crazy.
Well, it's almost as crazy as someone, and I'm sorry, I don't know who it is. So if whoever did this is listening right now, we'll know soon enough. But that someone thought that Nick Suzuki deserved a first place vote. I mean, the other ones like Alex Ovechkin, I can see it. I can see it. Zach Werenski, for sure, I can see it. He got one first place vote, despite Columbus not making the playoffs. Now, as I was mentioning before, To me, it shouldn't. He was the most valuable player on his team. Like, you can make that argument easily in his case.
Mm-hmm.
Cale Makar didn't get a first place vote, but finished sixth in voting, and so somehow Nick Suzuki got a first place vote, and neither Connor McDavid nor Cale Makar got one. That's what happened. But still, to your point, and the reason why we bring it up is that yes, Nick Suzuki's profile is growing. For next week they're going to announce the first 6 members of the Olympic teams at some point next week. I'm not saying that Nick Suzuki will be on that list. Connor McDavid for sure will be. So I think he'll be able to, console himself over not getting a first place vote in the hard voting by being the first name mentioned for the Olympic team. I think he'll be okay.
I think his aim is somewhere else right now.
Yes,
at this moment.
Right at this moment as we're recording, and they're in a tie game in Sunrise. So, but in terms of that Olympic team, which obviously this will not influence the Hockey Canada deciders or anything like that. But Robert Thomas got 1 5th place vote for the Hart, and Nick Suzuki got a first, a second, and 9 fifths to finish 9th in voting. Which, again, I good for Nick, but yeah, seems a little. He's in select company. Number 6, Cale Makar. Number 7, Zach Werenski. Number 8, Alex Ovechkin. Number 9, Nick Suzuki. Number 10, Connor McDavid. 11, Pasternak. 12, Quinn Hughes. So that's pretty.
Yeah, that first place vote does a lot of the heavy lifting, though.
Of course it does.
Point-wise.
Which is why I'm dying. I'm dying anyhow. I'm dying to see it.
But I mean, it's again. I think that it's good whether it's warranted or not, or some people probably won't go in too deep into this. They'll just look at the final results and say, look how Suzuki's he's ranked higher this year. I think it might just encourage people to just pay more attention next year.
Mm-hmm.
Although I like that you look at the results that Robert Thomas got, because to me they're not separated at birth, but they're pretty darn close as hockey players.
I mean, and their seasons. I mean, Robert Thomas had an injury at the beginning of the season that really kind of set him back a little bit. But during that time, Nick Suzuki was not playing very good hockey at the beginning of the season. But they both caught fire and led their respective teams on late charges to the playoffs in very similar fashion. Both got snubbed from the Four Nations. Both came back from that break and just took off. I think Nick Suzuki did it probably in a more high-profile way just because there's way more coverage in Montreal. A lot more gets written about him. We're both guilty of doing it. And Robert Thomas does it. Not that St. Louis is a bad hockey market. There's just not as many eyeballs on that franchise as there are on the Canadians. And so, but he had just as remarkable a final stretch, production wise. I mean, they were both top
2017 picks.
Oh yeah. They're tied at the hip. I mean, I talked to Robert Thomas about this in St. Louis. I believe I brought it up on the podcast, but I don't have it in front of me, but they were both top 5 scoring from First Nations on, and they're in competition for that same spot on Team Canada. Like there's no doubt in my mind that they're not. I don't think Hockey Canada is going to take both of them. They might take neither of them, but it's pretty clear to me and to Robert Thomas himself that he's in direct competition with Nick Suzuki for a spot on that team.
Yeah. He also finished 5th for the Lady Byng Trophy. Now, the Lady Byng, to me, is a difficult ballot to fill.
I hate voting on the Lady Byng.
You know what? We should not. I'll say it out loud.
Yeah.
I ask players because we don't know. I think that it's so, and I'm guilty of it, like everyone else, to look at the penalty minutes versus the amount of time you play and at least take it into consideration, which is a factor, but it's certainly not the only factor. It's on the ice, that you can really gauge the gamesmanship and most gentleman-like, whatever.
Gentlemanly.
Yeah.
Sportsmanship and gentlemanly player. Yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised. I mean, when I asked players last year, they said Kopitar, and unless I'm unaware of something that happened in his life, he did not stop being gentlemanly over the course of the summer. And he continues his good behavior.
He's very gentlemanly. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so it's okay. And there's, I mean, we've discussed also in the past that we both believe, and we were both convinced by our esteemed colleague Markel Farber years ago, that there should be more of a focus on defensemen for that award, because they are a victim of pressure. They're a victim of hits more than they give them for the majority of them. And you know, when you defend,
they have to clear space on the ice.
Yeah, and you have to. And when you are in a position where you defend, you are technically more susceptible to taking penalties. So that's where a guy like Jacob Slavin or Jake Sanderson also, to me, is a great candidate for that. So anyway, in all that to say that Suzuki finished 5th behind Kopitar, behind Braden Point, who had only 2 minutes of penalty until he fought Bobby McMahon at the end of the season.
And to me, like, Braden Point, you know, Braden Point is just good at, he's a sneaky, dirty player. Like, he's a hard player. He plays hard. And you know, he's not exactly what I think. He wasn't on my ballot. And I saw his penalty minutes. I know he's a prolific player, and I think he's a great player, obviously. I just don't look at him and think sportsmanlike and gentlemanly. Like, it's just not, it's not what jumps out. And the technical definition of the award is sportsmanship and gentlemanly conduct combined with high standard of playing ability. Gentlemanly is not the first word I think of when I think of Braden Point. You know, I mean, he plays the game within the rules, but that guy's a hard guy to play against. Like, he plays hard, and he's got a bit of nasty in him. So yeah, I had Slavin and Makar in my top 3. So
yeah, fair enough. But what's interesting is that Suzuki was the captain of he's been, because when I spoke to the guys in the room about the way that his leadership expressed itself, especially on the ice, there's a lot of a calming effect when guys get carried away. Like, the way his relationship with the officials is where I guess he gets some of those Lady Byng points, at least in the eyes of his own teammates. Because we saw this year the Canadians as a team were complaining a lot towards the officials. A lot. I think too much for my taste. And the coach did it a fair bit. He did.
Yes.
Yeah. But through all that, Nick Suzuki was a guy who would very rarely carry on about that, and would be the one maybe to calm things down and say, okay, let's move on. Let's turn the page, refocus, and we just accept what's going on, and we return to battle. And I think that in that sense, for a guy who's captain of a team at still a young age, I think that, and around a very young group, I think it's a great display of maturity on this part. So I like, to me, when I see him finishing 5th in the Lady Byng, his Lady Byng, to me, that's where I see it. That's what I like about it.
And what's notable about Nick is, and this has been the case for a long time, going back to his junior days when he was heavily targeted, in sound, in Guelph, he had a target on his back at all times. Every team that he played against knew that if you can get him off his game, your chances of winning increase. The man does not have like a retaliatory bone in his body. Like, he does not, the notion of retaliating does not exist in his brain. Like, he knows that's wasted energy. He knows that doesn't help you win. He knows it serves no purpose, that you're in all likelihood, and everyone actually does know this, but they're not able to control the impulse, but that you're more likely to get called on the retaliation than the actual initial foul. This has always been true in hockey. Everyone's always said it forever, but in the moment, it's hard to think that way. Nick Suzuki has always thought that way. He is the king of turning the other cheek and not letting any of that stuff distract him. And so that's another element of his calm demeanor that you were referring to that shows itself and would apply to the Lady Byng in the sense that, if you give Suzuki a whack, you're not likely to get a whack back, basically.
Yeah. And finally, well, he was on the Selke, finished 13 on the Selke. Still, there's still a long way to the top. He had only, his name appeared on 10 different ballots. For example, the guy who was just ahead of him, Seth Jarvis, was 12th. He was on 30 ballots. Uh-huh. He had 96 points total compared to Suzuki's 28. So there was really a line after the first 12 guys. But again, the Selke is really the sort of trophy where you have to earn your stripes and make people pay attention. I voted for Jarvis as a fifth, as my fifth vote, because I thought that he's the sort of guy that should get on people's radar when it comes to the Selke. Mm. But in his own right, Suzuki's made good progress. He's always mentioned how he wanted to emulate Patrice Bergeron.
Yeah.
I don't think that he's quite there, but there's a slow and steady progression or towards that goal. The fact that, to me, mainly in the defensive aspect of the game is how he managed, along with Caulfield, mainly to get pinned in their own end a lot less than in previous years. Mm-hmm. And their matchups continued to be very difficult. He just got better defensively. Plus his 200-foot game, his scoring has gone up again, as we mentioned earlier. So I think that he's becoming a very, very well-rounded player. Is he going to get at the point where he's going to be like a top 5 guy, the way that Philippe Danault was never able to accomplish? Maybe not, but at least he's entering the conversation this year.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Like, Selke voting to me is very similar to Baseball Hall of Fame voting, where you need to slowly gather momentum to the point that you reach that critical mass at one point, and you become considered as one of the top 2-way players in the game. And then once you have that, you really have to play poorly to no longer have that. Like, once you get that reputation, then you're constantly in the Selke conversation by default, and you have to do something drastic to leave that conversation, and your play has to fall off considerably. So, but to get into that conversation, to get that reputation, takes a lot of time and is generally built in the playoffs. Like, it obviously doesn't apply to that year's voting, but if you have a good playoff performance and show yourself to be this 2-way guy, then the following season, that will stay in people's minds, and they will look at you in that way, and that will help you gain momentum in that sense. So it's always a matter in the Selke vote. Like, did you gain more votes than the year before? Very, very similar to the Hall of Fame in baseball, but did you get more support? Are you building that momentum to get into that top 5 or top 3, I guess, conversation? And once you become a finalist, then you have a really good chance of winning a Selke at some point, because that's when people like just automatically think of you when it comes time to fill out their ballot. Like, oh, what did Suzuki do this year? Like, I should go check, kind of thing. Like, you just make sure that, like, for instance, this year, I think I had Barkov 5th on my ballot. He won, right? But I had so much. I actually intended on not having him on my ballot at all. Oh no, sorry, he was fourth. But he's behind Reinhardt, and so I was just so uneasy with the notion. I think I had Barkov 5th for a long time, and at the last second I put him 4th. I was so uneasy with the notion that I was in some way saying that Barkov is not a good defensive forward with my ballot, right? Which is ludicrous. Yeah. Like, no one would ever think that. But again, like what you said with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, it's about what did you do this season? And frankly, a lot of Barkov's numbers were not at his normal standard of play. And like, it's there were a ton of factors. I don't have all my like research in front of me, but there were a ton of things that kept pointing me away from voting for Barkov, and I felt uneasy doing it because I'm like, I'm going to look like a fool if I don't have Barkov on my ballot. But all the numbers that I'm looking at and all these all the different information I'm taking in my heart, I'm like, he doesn't deserve to win it this year. And frankly, there are probably 5 players who deserve it more than he does. And ultimately, I couldn't do it. I couldn't not put him on my ballot because I thought it was ludicrous to say that Alexander Barkov is not one of the 5 best defensive forwards in the NHL. But I thought after all my research that he wasn't this season, at least.
Mm-hmm. I had a season like this with Bergeron.
Right.
Because I remember
Claude actually stopped using him on defensive zone draws at one point. He started.
Yeah, and even the matchups, I mean, there was a lot of tough matchups given to Sean Corrali.
Yeah.
More than him. So
because what they were doing, I remember this very distinctly, is what they were doing is it wasn't Claude, it was Bruce Cassidy who did this. And it was he was sending them out on the fly, but more frequently. So like once the puck came out of their end, they would jump on to get an offensive zone shift, and they would jump right back off. And he was doing this consistently the whole year. So it got to the point where his offensive zone start numbers that year were like really high. He was starting way more shifts on the fly than normal, but primarily he was starting almost very, very few shifts in his own end. And I was like, whoa, okay, well, this is not what a defensive forward of the year, like the Selke trophy winner, looks like. Like that's supposed to be your role. Like my issue with Suzuki for the Selke is that he was not one of the primary penalty killers on the team this year. And to me,
yeah, you
got to be a penalty killer. Like that's part of the criteria in my books. That's why I have trouble voting for Sidney Crosby, because he doesn't kill penalties for them, and it's the same thing. So, but I'm glad you brought up the Bergeron thing, because I thought it was brilliant coaching by Bruce Cassidy. He really got the most out of him and Marchand. He was just force feeding them offensive zone time by doing that. It's a very high maintenance way to run a bench, but they did it really effectively.
Yeah, well, I think it was also at a time where the Boston Bruins offense was starting to thin out a bit.
Yeah,
so you would save your best elements for certain situations.
But if it weren't Patrice Bergeron, you would look at that and say he's playing sheltered minutes. Like that's how you talk about a lesser player. You say, oh, he's getting sheltered a lot. He's not facing all the difficult situations. Who in their right mind would say that about Patrice Bergeron? But that's how he was used that year, and that's not his fault.
Well, Laine and Newhook were used that way a whole lot in the second half of the season.
They were sheltered. They were being sheltered, but it's like that's the thing, is that it's easy to say that about those guys. It's harder to say that about Patrice Bergeron. Or for my dilemma this year was Barkov, and I see that I landed on keeping him 4th. But frankly, I had Hagel behind him at 5th, and everything that I looked up and every data point that I checked and everything that I saw, I should have had Hagel ahead of Barkov, and I chickened out. I feel bad about it. So sorry, Brandon. Okay. I'm sorry, Brandon Hagel. This is my public apology to you. I apologize.
For former Canadians. Okay.
He was never under contract. He was just a development camp invite. Yes.
Just had a jersey. I wonder if he kept it. Okay. If we move on to a guy who's in the rumors this year, in the rumor mill, these days. Sorry, not this year. These days.
Well, Jason Robertson.
Yeah, I know. And obviously, at the end of the season, the press conference, Jeff Gorton said, we might be looking. Yeah, everybody says that we need a centerman, but maybe we might look at some help somewhere else, because there are some wingers who are driving the play. I'm not sure if Jason Robertson fits that bill, because he's a lot of a finisher. Mm-hmm. But still, he seems to be a guy who could potentially be a cap casualty in Dallas, because there's only 1 year left on his contract that gives him a $7.75 million AAV. So, which means that at the end of the next year, he's going to be in line for a hefty raise. But he's only 25. To me, it's a bit weird to conceive that the Stars would say, you know what, in order to re-sign the likes of Granlund, Ben, and older guys like that, Duchesne will have to sacrifice, a goal scorer who's in his mid-20s. So I don't quite compute that, but if it's true that he's available, and Elliott seemed to say that he could be on the move for a Mikael Granlund extension, should the Canadians be interested in that?
And Duchesne and Ben. It's really... Yeah, this is all in the context of them adding Mikko Rantanen, right? And so when they sign, and you got to remember, just to put some context on this, like Jason Robertson's contract, with this contract that he's completing, did not come about easily. Like this was signed on October 5th, 2022, right before the season began, and so it was structured in a way so he's going to be an RFA with arbitration rights at the end of this contract in 2026. His qualifying offer is $9.3 million because he took a $1.5 million base in the first year, $8 million base. Then this year was 9.2, and next year it's 9.3. So the whole deal was structured to extract money coming out of it, right? And it was a contentious negotiation. It took some time, and I remember giving some thought as to whether is Cole Caulfield going to follow this path.
I remember that.
Yeah. So, and there was some concern over that, especially since he was entering, the final year of his entry level. He shares an agent with Jason Robertson, and so it's like it was. Anyhow, so that's why I think there was probably always this notion in Dallas that, we're signing this contract with Jason Robertson, but we're probably going to have to strongly consider at the end of it either moving him or moving on from it or whatever, just because the math might not work. And then obviously the Mikko Rantanen thing happens, and now you're further thinking that the math might not work. But that's a consideration for any team acquiring him, is you're looking at a player whose floor for his next contract, assuming he does not completely flame out this year, is going to be $9.3 million. Like it's looking like that's kind of the amount of money that he's going to attract. So now I don't necessarily have a problem with that. A guy who scores as consistently as he does, he didn't have a great playoff, but he was injured and he was coming back from injury, and he came back probably sooner than he should have. Picked it up, towards the end, but all that to say is, yes, the Canadians should look into it. It would be a huge upgrade. And frankly, if they were to get Robertson and you put Kirby Dach between Robertson and Demidov, like I give Kirby Dach a much better chance of looking much better than he did with Patrick Laine and Alex Newhook, all due respect to them. So I think it's an interesting situation that the Canadians should look at, and frankly, they're dealing with one of the few teams who remain in a cap crunch despite the fact the cap has gone up so far, largely because, again, of that Rantanen deal. So they're a team that probably would take futures and draft picks and prospects, assets that don't add to their cap hit, because as soon as you take, because they don't want to add to their cap hit. No, they need to find money. Yeah, well they need to compensate. They need to find money to keep those guys. And honestly, like, you might laugh, but like, I think even like Dodonov, they might want to keep. It obviously wouldn't cost that much, but it just adds to the nature of their off season and what they have to get done. So it's an interesting situation, because as we've mentioned many times, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of teams out there looking for what the Canadians are selling. Well, Dallas could be one of them, in the sense that they need to shed some money. And another guy I was thinking that might fall under this was Mason Marchment, which isn't as much money as Jason Robertson, so it it wouldn't be as consequential, or wouldn't impact their ability to do their other business as much as if they move Robertson. But the reason why I was thinking Mason Marchment might pop free is because of this dynamic that they're up against the cap, and they want to maintain this core of this team that's gone to the conference finals every year, and take another shot at it. Marchment seemed to me like a guy like the Canadiens might be able to go get him as a sort of hard to play against competitive type winger, who scores goals, often injured, but good goal scorer, competes, seems to fit all the characteristics that Jeff Gordon and Ken Hughes kind of laid out at the end of the season. But since then, obviously, this Robertson stuff has started. I think the Canadiens should look at it. And it's, give him, I wouldn't sign him immediately, but I would give him a year, see if he works where they're at. And if over the course of that next season, or at the end of next season, if it has worked out, then I think you can throw some big money at him, because he's a proven goal scoring talent, and would add some pop to their lineup, whoever he plays with, but would definitely create some options for them.
Yeah, and I think that what's interesting with Robertson is also the fact that he's right in the age group where you invest in a guy at the right time in his career, and it fits with the rest of the team. So and you mentioned the scenario where he would end up playing with Demidov. To me, I think that this is a great match. No matter who you put in the middle, I think that there's a very good playmaker finisher eventually down the road for the Canadiens in Demidov, and Robertson can certainly put the puck in the net. So, but he would, despite the fact that he will be very, very expensive a year down the road, the Stars won't give him away for free. There's going to be a lot of suitors for him. And in that sense, perhaps then Marchment, if the Canadiens want to keep some of their assets for something else, it won't cost you as much in terms of assets to acquire Marchment than it will for Robertson.
No, of course not. And so, but yeah, it's the thing with Robertson, again, not to harp on the same point all the time, but like, if he's available, there are a lot of teams looking for a player like Jason Robertson who also have a lot of draft picks and who also have a lot of prospects and who would be in those discussions. So it would, this is a bit of a perfect storm for the Stars, in the sense that, we don't need to revisit our belief or my belief or whatever that there isn't much of a market. There's not a lot of impact players available on the market. If the Stars were to put one on the market, and you're basically the best one, in terms of the trade market, I'm not talking about Mitch Marner or anyone like that, but you're gonna be running quite an auction at that point.
Yeah,
because a lot of teams would be interested in adding someone like Jason Robertson for all the reasons you spelled out. So yeah, it's the Canadiens should be involved. The Canadiens have the assets that I think would interest Dallas. But yeah, it's going to be a pretty fierce competition to get a guy like that who's a proven scorer. He has 168 goals in 374 career games.
But why is it a guy that you don't think that you're moving on with, moving ahead with?
I agree. It's a good.
How come is he not a core player on the Stars?
I think he is a core player on the Stars. I think the fact that you just added Mikko Rantanen changes everything. It just changes the whole concept of how you're building your team. I think what they got in Mikko Rantanen was like a better version of Jason Robertson, essentially. Like a sniping winger who's bigger, more playoff pedigree. He really kind of fills the role that Robertson has filled for them for the last few years. Is already signed to a big contract. You can't give Robertson $9.5 million a year or $10 million a year to basically do the same thing as you're paying Rantanen to do already at the number that he's at. So, what is Rantanen at? $12 million a year, right? So, are you going to pay $22 million a year to Rantanen and Jason Robertson to basically essentially do the same thing? I don't know. It's a tough one, and they've really locked in Rantanen's locked in, Hintz is locked in, Johnston's locked in, Heiskanen's locked in, even Lindell's locked in. At some point, they're going to have to pay Thomas Harley, which is going to be a big, big number. I'm sure Jim Nill loved seeing Thomas Harley on your Norris ballot. I'm sure he was very happy. I'm sure he was very happy about that. But they're going to have to pay him a lot. Like his contract's not up until next year. But that's going to be a big, big, big contract. So like it kind of, when you look at the Dallas Stars sheet, it kind of makes sense that they would trade Jason Robertson. It just, Mikko Rantanen arriving, the Harley contract, Ben, Duchesne, Granlund, all this stuff. I mean, I think the Ben, Duchesne, Granlund stuff is almost secondary to the Rantanen thing and the Harley thing, primarily. Like Thomas Harley's going to be a $10 million a year defenseman here. I don't see how they're going to avoid how do they not give him that kind of money? Like they're going to have to. I mean, he's an RFA, but still seems like.
Yeah. Speaking of the Dallas Stars defense, there's also another way for them to shed some money. Would be to unload the contract of Ilya Lyubushkin, who's a right-handed defenseman who doesn't have a nice contract at all.
No.
He's got 2 years left.
Short, yeah.
At $3.25 million a year. He's not a bad defenseman, but he's overpaid at that price. And for that reason...
It kind of reminds me of Savard's contract, no?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Savard ended up playing by default top.
He's got similar strengths and weaknesses to Savard.
Yeah. But, I mean, Savard ended up playing certainly top 4 minutes for the bulk of his stay in Montreal, which was not the case with Lyubushkin.
Well, he would never.
And he bounced around.
Never happen in Dallas, though. We can agree on that. If David Savard were playing for the Dallas Stars, he would not be playing top 4 minutes.
No. But they thought that they needed that sort of hole to plug in on the right side, and they gave him that money. Mm-hmm. And now,
well, not only
whether it's him, whether it's Matthew Dumba.
Matt Dumba is also
Matthew Dumba is
an attempt, and Cody Ceci was the third attempt to plug that hole on the right side.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think that Lyubushkin won't cost much to acquire. I'm pretty. I suspect that's what it's going to be.
Not at all. I mean, if they could unload Dumba, they would do that in a heartbeat. I wouldn't touch Dumba personally. Like I don't.
No.
That would be a non-starter. But yeah, Lyubushkin, I don't think would cost a whole lot of anything, frankly.
That's it. If it's just adding a contract, buying some time with a rugged guy on the right side,
probably get him for like a third-round pick. I would think fourth.
I like the idea of adding a veteran right-handed shot without having to give away any of your young D in return, or at least unless you go after a big fish, Mm-hmm. But this would be, I mean, I'm totally aware of the fact that in terms just of the dollar, it's a bit of an issue, but just the fit, the short-term fit,
not even that big of
the
an
transitional aspect of it, I like it.
It's not even that big of an issue, honestly. It's the contract itself is not. It's only it's 1 extra year. I mean, he's not an ideal player, that's for sure. But is similar in a lot of ways to Savard.
Well,
it really is.
Slightly more mobile, at least.
Well, yeah, sure, but I mean, he, in terms of physical presence, can block shots, can kill penalties, stuff like that. Like it's not a, you've had worse ideas than that. I'll say that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, that's good.
I'll try. But yeah,
I'd like to hear. I'd like for you to list them when we're in front of a beer next time.
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah, because the other thing in Dallas, obviously he's not a right shot, but the emergence of Bichel, or the maturation of Bichel, I should say, Bischel, Harley, Heiskanen, Lindell. They have those are four. Well, Lindell's not young anymore, but Heiskanen, Harley, and Bischel. That's a core on your blue line, and Lindell being there too. Obviously, is he's signed through 2030. So, they can afford to lose a Lyubushkin for nothing in the short term.
But they're already losing CC. They'll want to anyway. They'll be worth watching.
It's the right side of their defense, much like I think it's some degree of concern in Montreal, but it's been a concern in Dallas for a while. Like the Dumba reach in free agency. I mean, I think there were a lot of reasons for Dallas to know that signing Matt Dumba was not the thing to do, but they were so badly wanted help on their right side that they did it anyway. And Lyubushkin was acquired with the same intentions, and obviously CC came over in the Granlund trade and played frankly really well for Dallas, and did plug that hole quite admirably in a Cody CC kind of way. And frankly, I don't know if they don't get Lyubushkin, they could maybe sign that guy for if he came on a short term deal, which I doubt he would because he was actually used quite a bit in the playoffs, and I think he's probably in line to get a pretty decent contract from someone, as crazy as it sounds. I refer to Cody Ceci as the guy with 9 lives, but his stay in Dallas helped him a great deal. It really helped him.
Okay. I wanted to throw at you a couple of questions that our listeners and subscribers sent to us earlier. Alex D was wondering, what would you say is the biggest weakness of this rebuild so far? He says, for me, it's that the Habs have seemingly exited the tanking phase without ever drafting a center with the top picks. Not questioning the draft choices themselves, just recognizing that a center was never the clear BPA or best player available. So, the biggest weakness in that rebuild so far?
Biggest weakness? I mean, I would say that, well, first of all, I have trouble calling anything a weakness because the rebuild's not complete. And so we shouldn't be, I disagree that the Canadiens should have tanked one more year. I think there are people within the Canadiens themselves who think they should have tanked one more year, but I do feel that they properly identified the fatigue that was setting in among their young core players of constantly losing and not only constantly losing, but feeling like the organization was good with it. That had reached a tipping point where you were going to start to lose the buy-in from some of these guys. We're talking about Nick Suzuki for so long earlier in the podcast. Like that was a guy that was not going to go through another season where losses were welcomed by the organization. So you need to take that into account. Whatever theoretical rebuild you do, whatever sort of modeling or whatever, like all these things that you do on paper or on a spreadsheet or just in your mind, imagining what a rebuild will look like, you can't, if you forget the human element of it, your rebuild's not going to get anywhere, right? So I would disagree with that. But having said that, I don't know. I don't know what, I think there are, I wonder, I had no problem with it at the time. In fact, I wrote a glowing article about the Slafkovsky contract when it was signed. And the Gouli contract. I thought that was actually both really good pieces of business for the Canadiens. But I think going forward, and maybe they're locked into Slafkovsky now, and I think that they should feel comfortable with that. But what if he doesn't work out? What if this is what he is? And we've gone through this with other players where it seems like the potential is there, but it just never kind of fully realizes itself. So I don't know. That's the one thing that right now I would be uneasy with if I were Kent Hughes or Jeff Gorton is, did we just lock ourselves to 8 years of a guy who is going to spend half that time trying to figure out what's the best version of himself. How can I be most effective with my size and all this stuff, like all the stuff he's talked about for the better part of 2 years. You know, maybe he's
already at 200 games played in the NHL.
Yeah,
time flies.
Yeah, and the benchmark's kind of 300, right? At 300 games, you should know what you are.
Yeah,
and so it's he's getting there, and he seems to know what he should be. He has trouble applying it, so that, you know. But again, I think he will. I think he'll get there. I think he'll figure it out. But it's hard to hope for that when you're staring at 8 years at 7.6 mil a year. You know, so I think maybe. But yeah, I don't know if that's a weakness of the rebuild. Like I don't think they've had too many missteps. You know, I mean, has it been perfect? No, but the fact that you're getting, you know, you can't help but get the sense that there is a core forming. And I guess the one question I have is yes, you have the sense of a core forming. Is that core going to be good enough? Like, that's what I don't know. They are missing that stud piece, right? And so maybe Demidov could be that piece. Maybe Slav could be that piece. Who knows? It's still possible, but it's not likely. It's not looking very likely right now. But can you win without that one stud piece?
I don't think you can be good enough without that stud piece. But I think that Demidov can be. To me, he's a godsend for them. The fact that they were able to draft him 5th overall, this is extremely, extremely precious for their whole rebuild. They must have high-fived till the morning after when they were able to draft him. Slavkovsky, I think is a good answer. Both, I mean, you can second guess the timing of his contract because they didn't have to sign him at that point, right?
No,
so
they could have signed him. They could have signed him this year. And how different would that negotiation look after the year he just had?
You want to bank on a guy and say, okay, well, we'll try to save on a few millions in let's say in the second portion of his second tier of his career. But in the meantime, you gamble on that by just looking at how he progressed in his second season in the last 40 games of that season and say, yeah, we've seen enough in order to give him that contract. So they'll look extremely smart if he takes off next year. So it's too early to tell in that sense. And I think that you cannot pin it on them or say that it's a weakness of the rebuild. The fact that draft class was particularly weak. They ended up drafting first in a year where 9 times out of 10, the number 1 pick overall is a stronger player than what they could choose from that year.
Yeah.
So I think that was just, I won't call it a weakness, but I'll call it bad timing. So that's something that so far has affected their rebuild, but there's still so many things that remain to be played. If you want to nitpick, you could say, well, I say, are the Doc and Newhook acquisitions, the trades that were made, were they worth it? I think they were very, very interesting gambles and moves worth doing. Have they paid off the way that they wanted? No, not yet. We'll see how that goes, but you could look into that. You can look also along the edges, maybe on the margins. I'm sorry, how maybe they were scared of losing guys on waivers, and for that they held their breath roster wise. Last year with Primo, this year with Pezzetta, and sometimes you say is the development of other guys is impacted by the fact that you're sort of jamming yourself a little bit, but those are minor things, very minor.
And actually, I kind of like I like the fact that they've had veterans around. Like, I don't think they should have gone the Blackhawks route, where what they initially tried to do, and then all of a sudden they realized, oh no, we can't have a room full of kids, and we can't have this. We have to bring these guys in. The Canadiens were left with those guys, right? Like the guys that they kept around. are holdovers. Their contracts are holdovers from the Bergevin years, right? So like, and to their credit, to the players' credit, to Martin St. Louis and his staff's credit, like Josh Anderson, when it seemed like that was a contract that was going to be an albatross, looks close to worth that contract now in a new cap environment. Brendan Gallagher's contract does not look as outrageously bad as it did a couple of years ago. Like it's, even Christian Dvorak, crying out loud. Like people are now talking about the Canadiens should re-sign him when the entire city seemed to want him banished and gone from their team forever. So, and I think those guys like that have helped the younger guys to sort of navigate all this and to take ownership of the team and stuff like that. So, yeah, it hasn't been perfect. I think by and large, they've done a good job. And I want to be clear, like I think it's also nitpicking the Slav contract, right? It's because honestly, if Slavkovsky by the end of like this season, or if he enters next season, so the 26-27 season, as being like a really solid, big, 60 to 70 point scorer, if he settles into that sort of mold, 7.6 million will not be an outrageous amount of money for a player like that. You'll be like at 7.6 million, you will be like a third tier of forwards in the league. You have the top that's going to be at like 14, 15 million by that point. You'll have another tier at hovering around 10, and then you'll have that. And so it won't be, what's clearly going to happen by then is that in all likelihood, Nick Suzuki's deal is going to look like a total bargain. Cole Caulfield's deal looks like it's going to be a total bargain, but if Slavkovsky settles into that area where he's just a really effective player who gets 60, 70 points and is able to go and be physical in the playoffs, then that contract will not be a burden on the Canadiens. I think he would be appropriately paid for that level of production when you're talking about $113 million salary cap.
Yeah, and plus it's not just production. For in his case, and I know that he threw a bunch of names, Brady Tkachuk and all that, as inspirations of what he could become, but he needs to become his own player. There needs to be other players looking at Juraj Slavkovsky and say, boy, I wish I was Juraj Slavkovsky. He's got such a unique package. That uniqueness has to be expressed beyond the points. It's also is the impact, a consistent impact on the ice that goes beyond the points. Just that he eventually becomes the sum of all his parts, and then he will definitely deserve his salary, a high salary, no matter if he makes 55 points or 75 points.
Yes.
It's just, yeah.
Well said. All right. Last one. So this one's from Danton D. How bullish are you actually on the Canadiens becoming a contender in the next few years? It seems like you both, but especially Arpin, are pessimistic about the various avenues available to management to improve the team. You've talked extensively about the fact that there are very few teams looking to trade established players for futures. You've dismissed the idea of giving high salaries with term to impact UFAs. You've been doubtful about the viability of offer sheets in the current cap environment. And lately, you've even raised doubts about packaging multiple picks to move up the draft due to the presence of other teams wanting to do the same. So outside of Hutson, another Hutson-style draft home run, that doesn't leave a lot of other approaches for improvement. So given all this, is it fair to label you doubtful? And if not, how do you reconcile your pessimism about the viability of the various possible approaches to improving the team? Boy, that was a dissertation. It was really well written. I was kind of jealous. Listen.
That's why I read it all.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I thought
it's very well written. It's very well argued, I would say. Well, I mean, pessimism is there's also just realities, right? Like yes, you're pessimistic about. I don't know if I'm pessimistic to the Canadiens' capacity to improve. I'm realistic about what's going on in the league and what the landscape looks like. And that reality is that the Canadiens are not a unique team. What the Canadiens are trying to do is not unique to them. It's that there are many teams trying to do the same thing, and that makes what the Canadiens are trying to do more difficult. That's only natural because there are other teams offering similar types of things to teams that are looking to unload players. And so, and frankly, those teams that are looking to unload players, I think it's been pretty well documented. I've written it. Pierre Lebrun wrote a piece quoting a GM saying there are no sellers in the league. It's just a reality right now that in the cycle of the NHL, right now, there are a lot of teams who think they can win, or some teams who think they can win. There are a lot of teams who are playoff teams trying to get into that upper crust of the league. And then there are a whole bunch of teams, and Montreal's one of them, who are trying to get into that consistent playoff conversation. And there are very few teams saying we need to start over and look to win 5, 6, 7 years down the road. Whereas as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, or well, 3 years ago when Jeff Gordon and Ken Hughes came in, they were one of 6, 7, 8 teams in various stages of a rebuild when they decided to embark on theirs. Like there was a lot of teams rebuilding. And so just timing wise, these guys arrived at a time, and we've talked about it extensively, you and I, like how are the Canadiens going to catch up to Buffalo, Detroit, and Ottawa in terms of their rebuild? We've talked many times about that. You throw Anaheim in there, Chicago, like all these teams embarking on rebuilds at roughly the same time means
Columbus.
Yeah, it just makes it more complicated. It's not as easy as saying like, oh, well, this year we're just going to trade all our draft picks and go out and get established players that are going to help us. Well, when Columbus has stated clearly that the 14th pick and the 20th pick are also available, well, maybe someone will take that. And if Detroit's picking at 13th and they say, well, our pick's available, and Vancouver's picking at 15th, well, our pick's available. Like, how valuable is the 16th pick in the draft if the 3 picks in front of it are also available for a trade? Like, it's hard to deny that. You can say it all you want that our picks are available. You don't want to just give them away for a lesser value, Like, I mean, you want to get a player that's going to make an impact in exchange for those picks, because those picks are valuable. Like the players that the Canadiens can get at 16 and 17 will help this rebuild along. They will be useful players in that range. Potentially could be useful players, I should say. I'm assuming that they pick the right players, but the players that will be available at 16 and 17 will be useful to this whole project. But it's basic economic theory that if pick 9 in Buffalo, pick 10 in Anaheim, pick 13 in Detroit, pick 14 in Columbus, pick 15 in Vancouver, pick 16 and 17 in Montreal, and pick 20 in Columbus are all available on the trade market, none of those picks have as much value as they normally would.
No, for sure. Yeah. Well, and it's being pessimistic in a very short-term basis, because that's the analysis for the next 2 to 3 weeks, right? We're not talking about, when the question's framed in becoming a contender in the next few years, it's not all going to be decided, thank God, in the next couple of weeks.
Right.
There's going to be a lot of decisions that are made beyond that time frame. I think most decisions. And I think that personally, I mean, I fully endorse what you just explained it, but to me, I still remain very hopeful in how they can become competitive and become a contender in the next few years, because even though I still remain to be convinced that the current crop of talent that they've got, with an asterisk next to Demidov's name, but apart from that, as we mentioned earlier in the pod, I'm not sure that they've got like that true locomotive that can propel them. I think that they still have up their sleeves 3 big moves. They still have a big trade that they can make. I think that they'll have a big UFA signing to do. That's not going to this summer, most likely, probably more the summer after. And also, you have to see once they graduate Reinbacher, the sort of impact that he can have on the right side.
Yeah.
To me, the big trade, the big UFA signing, and Reinbacher's evolution in a span of 3 years could very well determine if the group that we see right now, to which a couple of more prospects could be added to the mix. But I think that those three moves will determine if they're going to be a contender or not. And this is not something that we're going to know based on, are they going to be able to fetch a second line centerman prior to the draft or not?
And what I would add to that is, to me, when they embarked on this rebuild, I personally tied it to the expiry of Carey Price's contract. That when Carey Price's contract expires at the end of next season, they have to be ready. They have to prepare, lay the groundwork for having that be a highly impactful offseason when the shackles of the Carey Price contract. Now, at the time, I didn't know that we were going to have this huge jump in the salary cap, right? Like, it's that I didn't realize was going to happen so drastically. Obviously, it wasn't going to be a flat cap forever, but to know that this changes that a little bit, but still, the Canadians are still going to have to operate in LTIR next season in all likelihood. I don't see a scenario where they'll be able to just carry Price's contract all season. So they will still have to operate in LTIR. It's still difficult. It complicates their life to some extent. And when that contract expires, but like they've been it hampers them to some extent, but it doesn't hamper them in any meaningful way that's preventing them from being a much greater team than they can be otherwise. So to me, it's like, lay the groundwork for when that contract expires. You have everything in place to most benefit from the financial freedom that would provide, so that you can actually do really impactful things in the off season. And until then, draft, develop, build your prospects up so that they're actual key members of the team. And by and large, that's what they've done. And a lot of the improvement of this team is going to come from the people that are on it right now. You know, Ivan Demidov 3 years from now, Lane Hutson 3 years from now, and I know we were talking about Slavkovsky, but really Slavkovsky, if he figures it out, which I think he will, 3 years from now, what's that going to look like? In addition to Caulfield being, you know, like the improvement Caulfield's shown in his overall play and his two-way game is extremely encouraging. But if he becomes a consistent 40 to 45 goal scorer, Nick Suzuki becoming a 90 to 95 point centerman, which as recently as a year ago looked very unlikely, now looks somewhat likely, if not almost probable based on what we saw this season. So that's the engine that's going to make this team good. And the stuff that they do around that in some ways is somewhat peripheral, but like if those guys don't work, then the whole project is already gone. And frankly, like the amassing of that core, which I would include, like, I agree with your point about Reinbacher, and we haven't even seen him play in the NHL yet. So it's like, they're not at a critical moment of their rebuild yet. 12 months from now, if you ask me that question, I would say yes, they need to get moving. But this is why this playoff appearance was gravy in my books. And they might miss the playoffs next year, and it wouldn't be a disaster if they did, frankly.
All right. On that note,
more
Arpin.
Pessimism from Arpin. Enjoy. just dishing it up.
That's it. Oh yeah, you're a Debbie Downer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I love it.
All right, buddy. Let's wrap this up. I'm gonna go to bed now. So thanks a lot, everybody, for listening to this episode of the BasuandGodin Notebook. We'll be back on Monday. So if you're not a subscriber, we'll well, what are you waiting for? We've got our Monday episodes too, and we'll still continue to pump content throughout the summer. And our founding members, stay alert, because we're going to send you soon a date for our next founders meeting.
Mhm.
So there's that. So there you go. See you.
Enjoy the Grand Prix, Marc-Antoine. Vroom vroom.
I will.